Alright, so now that we've talked about other types of shapes, we're going to be moving on and finding circumference and area of circles. Today's lesson is going to focus on circumference. So just a few definitions. A circle is a set of points in a plane that are a fixed distance from a given point, which is called the center. The radius, or a radius, connects the center to any point on the circle, and the diameter connects 2 points on the circle and passes through the center. Now I know that's a lot to take in and kind of remember, so let's just look at a visual here. So the red line that goes all the way around, that is the circumference. Okay. In the middle here, we have the center. Okay. This green line is the radius. And then this purple line or bluish line is the diameter. Now you may notice that the radius and the diameter kind of measure the same thing. The only difference is that the diameter is the whole way across and the radius is just half. So the diameter is always equal to 2 times the radius because it takes 2 radiuses to make a diameter. And then the circumference of a circle is the distance around a circle. So it's equivalent to finding the perimeter. If you want to remember it that way. Now some formulas to remember when you're working with circumference is that we have this special number called pi, and that pi is really the ratio of the circumference to the diameter. But we can use that number to find the circumference by taking either pi times the diameter or 2 times pi times the radius, because remember that it takes 2 radiuses to make a diameter. In our example here, we have a radius of 3, so if we did 2 times 3 times pi, you get about 18.8, or if we did 6 times pi, you get about 18.8 units. Now I don't know if you know this or not, but pi is what's called an irrational number, which means that it repeats, it's a decimal that repeats forever with no pattern. And because of that, we approximate it. We sometimes use the actual number pi because there's a pi key in a lot of calculators. Or you'll hear people use 3.14 or the fraction equivalent or approximators, which is 22/7. Now the 3.14 is probably the one that is used more often though. So now let's use our information that's given and find the circumference of each circle, both in terms of pi and to the nearest 10, and we're going to use 3.14 for pi. So we're finding the circumference with a radius of 4. That means we're going to use the circumference is equal to 2 times pi times our radius. So in this case it becomes 2 times pi times 4. So in terms of pi, our circumference would equal 8 pi, because sometimes you'll see pi used more like a variable. If we use the decimal approximation and take 8 times 3.14, we get 25.12, but rounded to the nearest tenth, we would take out the 2 and it would just be 25.1 meters. Now if we're going to find the circumference of a circle with a diameter of 3.3, it's going to equal pi times our diameter. So in terms of pi, it would be 3.3 pi. If we're doing it in terms of using 3.14, we're going to take 3.3 times 3.14, and we get 10.362. but we're rounding to the nearest tenth. So 6 tells us to round up. So I'm going to take all this out, and it becomes 10.4 feet. So now it's your turn. So why don't you try each of these on your own, both in terms of pi and using 3.14 rounded to the nearest tenth. So with a radius of 8 in terms of pi, it's going to be 16 pi. Or we're going to do 16 times 3.14. And we get 50.24, which becomes just 50.2 centimeters. Circle with diameter of 4.25 is going to become 4.25 times pi in terms of pi. If we use our approximation, it becomes 13.345 or just 13.3 inches. So how is this actually used more in real life? One way we can do it is looking at a Ferris wheel. If a Ferris wheel has a diameter of 56 feet and makes 15 revolutions per ride, we can calculate how far someone would travel during the ride using 22/7 or 3.14, but we're going to practice with the 22/7 this time. Because it's diameter, we're going to do circumference because it's distance around, which is going to equal pi times our diameter, so in this case pi times 56, but in place of pi, I'm going to use 22/7. So if I do 22 times 56, because it's really 56 over 1, I get 1,232 over 7. That doesn't give me a lot of information, so I'm actually going to divide that. It becomes 176 feet that they travel total during the ride. So let's look at another example. The second hand on the clock is 7 inches long. So they're talking about the one that actually tracks the seconds, which is this one right here. So we want to know the distance it travels in 1 hour. Use 22/7 for pi. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try this one on your own. So here we know that because it's a second hand, it's a radius. So I'm going to do 2 times pi times our radius, which is 7, which becomes 14 pi. Or I could take out the pi and put in its approximation, which is 22/7. So I'm going to do 14 times 22, which gives me 308 over 7. Divide by 7, which is 44 inches. However, it asks us for 1 hour. If you think about the second hand, travels all the way around the clock once every minute. So we're going to have to take 44 and multiply it by 60 for the 60 minutes in an hour. So here it actually ends up traveling 2,640 inches.